And this time, it is not just an airstrike. It is not just a naval maneuver. What is happening right now, as we speak, could be the most significant military escalation since the war with Iran began. The United States is preparing to deploy one of its most elite and feared fighting forces, the 82nd Airborne Division, to the Middle East. 3,000 paratroopers, a division commander, a full headquarters element, orders expected within hours. The question the entire world is asking right now is simple. Is America getting ready to put boots on the ground in Iran? Today we break it all down, the unit, the mission, the target, the risks, and what it all means for the world. This is the full story. The United States is planning to deploy about 3,000 troops from the 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East, the Wall Street Journal reported today, Tuesday, March 24, 2026, as the White House weighs options to ease Iran's stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz. A written order to dispatch a brigade combat team is expected imminently. Fox News correspondent Jennifer Griffin reported that the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division himself, Major General Brandon Tegmeyer, along with his headquarters staff, has been ordered to deploy to the Middle East to establish forward command and control for potential joint forcible entry missions. And just hours later, President Trump made a stunning statement from the White House. Speaking to reporters, Trump declared, "This war has been won," while also suggesting that internal changes in Iran amounted to a shift in leadership. "We really have regime change, because the leaders are all very different from the ones we started with," he said. So on one hand, Trump is saying the war is won. On the other, he is sending 3,000 elite paratroopers toward the Persian Gulf. Which is it? Let us find out. Before we get into the mission, you need to understand exactly who the 82nd Airborne Division is, because this is not just any military unit. This is arguably the most feared rapid response ground force on the planet. The 82nd Airborne Division is based out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, co-located with Pope Air Force Base. A brigade, about 3,000 soldiers, of the 82nd is constantly on standby as the immediate response force, tasked to be able to deploy anywhere in the world within 18 hours. The division specializes in seizing contested territory by parachuting out of airplanes. The 82nd is light infantry, meaning they do not come with tanks or other large armored vehicles. The 82nd Airborne Division is classified as the Army's global response force and is considered the most elite rapid deployment unit in the entire U.S. Army. While soldiers in other infantry units are simply called infantry, soldiers of the 82nd Airborne Division are always distinguished as paratroopers, a distinction they wear with immense pride. The division's combat history is extraordinary. It includes the pivotal Normandy invasion during World War II, the operation that turned the tide of the entire war. Since then, it has been deployed in Korea, Vietnam, the 1990 Gulf War, the rapid deployment following the elimination of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, the final rearguard evacuation during the 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal, and the emergency deployment to Poland just before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. When the 82nd Airborne shows up, it means America is serious. Dead serious. Now let us talk about what many military analysts believe is the primary target behind this deployment. An island. A small 5-mile-long island sitting in the Persian Gulf just 15 miles off the Iranian coast. Its name is Karg Island, and it is worth more to Iran than almost anything else it possesses. Karg Island is a strategic port and oil export hub that handles up to 90% of Iran's oil exports. The island contains large oil storage facilities connected by pipelines to Iran's largest oil and gas fields. It hosts 3 main energy infrastructure sites, including the Falat Iran Oil Company, which produces 500,000 barrels of crude oil per day. Trump himself called Karg Island Iran's crown jewel. U.S. Central Command already carried out a massive bombing campaign on more than 90 targets on Karg Island, destroying naval mine storage facilities, missile storage bunkers, and multiple other military sites, while deliberately leaving the oil infrastructure intact. Trump said, "We've taken out everything but the pipes. We left the pipes because to rebuild the pipes would take years for them." White House officials have made their position clear on Karg Island. One source with knowledge of the White House thinking said, "He wants Hormuz open. If he has to take Karg Island to make it happen, that's going to happen." Another senior official added, "If he decides to have a coastal invasion, that's going to happen, but that decision hasn't been made yet." Seizing the island would not only further cripple Iran's economy, it would provide a massive bargaining chip to force Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz at the Gulf's entrance. This is the leverage play. Control Karg Island, strangle Iran's oil revenue, force them to the negotiating table. That is the strategy. So how would a potential seizure of Karg Island actually work? Military analysts have been laying out the operational picture in detail. Retired Admiral James Stavridis, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, described the likely operational sequence. The Marines would lead the initial assault, with the challenge being to get their amphibious ships through the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians should be expected to fire massive drone attacks, small boats, some loaded with explosives, and missiles directed at the Marine Expeditionary Unit. The ground force would likely land on Karg by air, from tilt-rotor Ospreys and helicopters. Any Iranian ground troops still effective following pre-attack strikes should be overcome by the first waves of U.S. forces, Stavridis said. Still, such an operation carries significant risks and potential pitfalls. For example, much of the island could be booby-trapped. An amphibious assault of Karg Island would involve the Marine unit escorted by U.S. Navy destroyers to provide anti-missile and anti-drone coverage. There would also likely be U.S. Air Force planes overhead and Army Apache helicopters. Retired Marine Colonel Mark Canchin described it as, "So you'd have lots of things coming together to protect the Marines while they get ashore." This is where the 82nd Airborne becomes essential. Once the Marines establish an initial foothold, the 82nd Airborne Division would rapidly deploy to expand the perimeter, secure additional objectives, and assume longer-term ground control. The division's larger manpower and sustainment capabilities would enable it to relieve Marine forces and maintain operational presence over time. The Pentagon's internal planning also reportedly covers the handling and detention of Iranian soldiers and paramilitary personnel. Military analysts say this requirement normally appears only in scenarios involving sustained ground engagement, not limited air operations. This is not a drill. This is not theoretical. The planning is real, detailed, and operational. The 82nd Airborne deployment does not exist in isolation. It is part of a massive, multi-pronged military buildup that has been quietly accelerating for days. Thousands of U.S. Marines are expected to arrive by Friday, the same day President Trump has set as the deadline for Iran to fully reopen the strait. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit departed Japan on March 13th aboard the USS Tripoli, which also carries F-35 fighter jets. The USS Tripoli is essentially a small floating military base capable of carrying F-35s, Seahawk helicopters, and MV-22 Osprey aircraft. The 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit and the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group have also had their deployment rerouted and accelerated. When you combine all these units, you are looking at one of the largest rapid combat force buildups in the Persian Gulf in decades. Now let us be honest, because this is not just a story of American military power. It is also a story of enormous risk. Retired Admiral Stavridis was direct about the dangers: drone attacks, explosive-laden small boats, and ballistic missiles targeting U.S. ships. And once on the ground, U.S. forces could face a booby-trapped island, a nightmare scenario for any ground force. Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery warned, "If we seize Karg Island, they're going to turn off the spigot on the other end." He said it was more likely the U.S. would send destroyers and aircraft to escort tankers, eliminating the need for an invasion. The 82nd Airborne's effectiveness is tied to speed rather than protection. As a light infantry force, it is vulnerable to mechanized counterattacks. This limitation underscores the importance of integrating additional forces to provide engineering support and heavier firepower. Iran has threatened to mine the Persian Gulf if the U.S. appears to be on the verge of landing troops, creating devastating hazards. Meanwhile, Iran continues vowing to fight until complete victory and has shown no signs of backing down despite the airstrikes. The stakes could not be higher. American lives are on the line. The world's energy supply is on the line. And the entire geopolitical order of the Middle East hangs in the balance. We will keep you updated as this story develops. Here is what makes this story so extraordinary. President Trump is simultaneously pursuing two completely contradictory paths at the same time. On one hand, just yesterday, he announced a 5-day pause on strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure, claiming that productive conversations were underway between Washington and Tehran. He said the U.S. and Iran had reached major points of agreement, including that Iran would never have a nuclear weapon. On the other hand, today he is deploying the 82nd Airborne Division, sending 3 additional warships, accelerating 2 Marine Expeditionary Units toward the Persian Gulf, and preparing operational plans to seize Karg Island. Military analysts at the Soufan Center wrote in a published analysis that Trump's 5-day delay on strikes could be aimed at buying time for the Marines and the 82nd Airborne to arrive in position, not as a genuine peace gesture, but as a tactical pause to get forces into place before the next phase of military action. U.S. officials have repeatedly described the current planning process as providing the president with maximum optionality, a term that reflects the desire to maintain credible escalation paths without prematurely triggering them. This approach allows Washington to combine airstrikes, naval operations, economic pressure, and potential ground actions into a layered strategy intended to force Iran to alter its behavior without immediate full-scale war. Trump himself called out his NATO allies directly, posting on Truth Social. They didn't want to join the fight to stop a nuclear-powered Iran. Now that fight is militarily won, with very little danger for them. They complain about the high oil prices they are forced to pay, but don't want to help open the Strait of Hormuz, a simple military maneuver that is the single reason for the high oil prices. So easy for them to do, with so little risk. Cowards, and we will remember. This is pressure on every front, military, diplomatic, and political, being applied simultaneously. It is a high-stakes gamble unlike anything the world has seen in years. Here's where we stand tonight, Tuesday, March 24, 2026. The 82nd Airborne Division, America's most elite rapid response ground force, is being deployed to the Middle East. Orders are expected within hours. 3,000 paratroopers, a commanding general, a full headquarters staff, 2 Marine expeditionary units converging on the Persian Gulf, 3 additional warships en route, and a 5-day diplomatic window that is ticking down by the hour. The situation remains fluid, but the scale of planning now underway demonstrates that this conflict has entered a phase where ground force options are no longer theoretical. They are being shaped into executable operational plans. The world is watching, Iran is watching, and the next 5 days will tell us whether this is the beginning of one of the most daring military operations in modern American history, or the final pressure that brings Iran to the negotiating table and ends this war before it gets even worse. We are watching every development, and we will keep you informed every step of the way. If this video informed you, please like, subscribe, and share. This is the kind of news that matters. Raw, real, and delivered to you straight. See you at the next update.